Cosmetics, strange collectible items, and many things that are no longer obtainable are among the greatest flexes in Destiny 2. This video is a collection of the biggest flexes in the game, starting with having the maximum possible triumph score. This is something that less than 100 people have, and these players have been dedicated enough to do every single triumph in the game ever since it came out. Many of these triumphs are no longer available, and they require you to do some of the most tedious chores in the history of this game. You have to do things like 500 waves of Altar of Sorrow, 150 ruffians every title, and the list goes on. Next up, we have Trials of the Nine Prestige Armor, and this set was awarded for going flawless and doing certain challenges. This armor required a decent amount of skill and many flawlesses in order to get, but it is some of the coolest stuff we've ever seen, and it left after year 1, making it quite a flex if you have it today. Another pretty cool armor set is the Faction Rally armor from way back in 2017 and 2018. These are kind of a flex to have today because number 1, it was so long ago, but number 2, it required a lot of grinding on all 3 of your characters, and also they're pretty rare because not a lot of people were even playing that much during Curse of Osiris. Over the many years, there have been a lot of different Eververse engrams, and it is a colossal flex if you somehow have every single one from all of the different seasons. I know of at least one player who is holding all of the old Eververse engrams from the first 2 years, which looks really cool displayed in their inventory. Next up, we have the pulse rifle Redrix's Broadsword, and this was only obtainable during Season 3 of the game, and you had to get Fabled in the competitive playlist. Destiny was really not that popular at the time, and the competitive playlist was even less popular, so really not that many people were able to climb to the Fabled rank and acquire this weapon. Redrix also had an ornament that you could get for reaching the Legend rank in Season 3, but this was so hard to do that only 633 people were ever able to get this and equip it on their broadsword. The shaders that you're looking at right now might not seem like too much of a flex at first glance, but the crazy thing is that these are actually up to $100,000 shaders. These shaders are acquired from the Bungie Foundation, and they require you to raise up to $100,000 for charity, making them some of the most rare shaders in the entire game. Especially for the Crucible, if you have a really high kill count on one of your weapons, this is really impressive because it shows people just how talented you are and just how dedicated you are to using that specific weapon. Of course, the PvE numbers can be impressive as well, but they tend to be a little bit less valid because a lot of people just AFK and farm up hundreds of thousands of kills without actually playing the game. If your Guardian looks really cool, that can be a pretty great flex in Destiny because there's a lot of screens that show other people your character, and it just shows that you've gone the extra mile to make yourself look amazing. For some players, drip is the true endgame of Destiny, and having a good transmog that makes use of different shaders and unique armor is seen as very impressive by other players. Something that is arguably even cooler than your Guardian's fashion, though, is having a great fashion in real life, and therefore I'm happy to say that you can currently get up to 60% off everything from Into the AM. Their Black Friday sale lasts until December 8th, and it's the biggest sale that they do every year, so this is the best possible time for you to get something for yourself or maybe pick out a gift for the holidays for a friend or a family member. This is one of the flannels that they sent me, and it's really nice and comfy, but I also really like their graphic tees. If you click my link below, you can get 10% off in addition to 60% off for the Black Friday sale, so go click the link below to check them out. You definitely will not regret it. Thanks to them for sponsoring today's video. Getting back to our Destiny flexes, if you have the max gilded title of 13 times on something like Flawless, Conqueror, or Dredgen, this is seen as very impressive because doing these titles 13 different times over 13 different seasons shows that you are just really dedicated to this game. It also shows to others that you've been around since the very beginning and you've built up that history over many years. Continuing on the topic of title flexes, the raid titles are some of the rarest in the game, and they generally require you to do 4+ weeks of master challenges with coordinated 6-man teams. For example, the Iconoclast title from the Salvation's Edge raid is really difficult because it requires some of the most effort and time of any raid title we've seen so far. The titles that came out back during the Forsaken era are also kind of rare because they required you to do a lot of different grinds and basically all of the stuff that came out in any given season. For example, the Blacksmith title required Flawless Scourge of the Past, over 100 Forge completions, and the RNG of getting the shaders. One of my biggest regrets as a Destiny player is not getting the Shadow title back in the day, but it turns out there was a reason why I didn't get it. This title required not only doing everything in the raid, including a flawless run of Crown of Sorrow, but it also required you to do 3 heroic Menagerie bosses with a full fire team to do flawless as well. There's no denying that having a good title is pretty awesome, but something that is even more of a flex is having one of the rarest and coolest emblems in the game. For example, the Wish Ascended is currently the rarest earnable emblem in the game, and this was for doing the last wish within 24 hours. Only 12 players were able to do this, and one of them has actually been banned since, so nowadays there are 11 players who have this out in the wild. Although they're not nearly as rare as the Last Wish emblem, there are also many other Day 1 emblems which people consider to be quite a flex. Depending on which raid it is, these emblems can all demonstrate that you're a pretty dedicated player who is very skilled at Day 1 raiding. Some of the other rarest emblems are the Movie of the Week emblems, because these can only be acquired by a few people each week that Bungie selects in their TWAB article. I personally really like the Lens of Fate emblem, and this one is a little bit of an extra flex because it was only obtainable many years ago. Alongside the Movie of the Week emblems, the Artist of the Week emblems are also quite rare and quite impressive for exactly the same reasons. Humanity's Chosen is an exceptionally rare emblem that was only given out to a few people who apparently had a positive voice in the community. This emblem is a bit of a mystery though, because it was only given out to 3 people and it has never been seen since. Although it's not something that can be tangibly demonstrated within the game, people love to talk about and flex their raid placements. The raid races are the most competitive thing in the game, and they only happen twice a year, and between figuring out mechanics, having good execution, and competing with other teams, these people are put in a really high pedestal if they're able to achieve a good placement in the raid race. The one thing that I suppose is really tangible is having those physical raid belts that you get for placing worlds first, and these are some of the best flexes you could possibly have related to Destiny. Niobe Labs was one of the hardest puzzles ever put into the game, and people who solved it back in the day were given an emblem and a ghost shell. Speaking of ghost shells, another one that's pretty cool is the Sagira shell, because it required having all of the prophecy weapons during Curse of Osiris, and like I mentioned earlier, not a lot of people played during that time, so it is pretty rare to have nowadays. The Contender shell is also a pretty big flex because it dropped as RNG after a Leviathan completion, and some people went over 100 clears without ever seeing it dropped. It tracked how many encounters you completed, and remember back in the day, trackers were really limited and you couldn't just track anything on any ghost shell. Trials of Osiris cosmetics are also very cool to have because they require you to have a lot of skill to go flawless consistently, and they require a lot of luck to get them to actually drop. As you can see here, many of the things like the ghosts, the ships, and the sparrows from Trials just look amazing, and it's a good way to tell other players that you're probably pretty good at PvP. Another thing that's pretty cool but has been essentially lost to time is the old Festival of the Lost items. Many of these you can't get anymore, but some players have held on to these strange gag items over the years. If you really want to let other players know that you play this game a lot, it can be a big flex to have a high artifact level in the current season, because it is the definition of a time sink in the current game. The dungeon content in Destiny 2 is obviously designed for 3 players, but if you're able to do it solo and also do it flawless, that is considered to be pretty impressive. Really taking this challenge to the next level though, if you've done every single dungeon solo flawless, this is awesome because it is considered some of the hardest solo content in the game. Having a good build is obviously something that's quite important for endgame content, but an extra big flex is having a powerful build that nobody else really knows about. It's really common nowadays for players to just go on YouTube and then literally copy-paste a build directly into DIM and directly into the game and come up with none of it on their own. So if you're able to come up with a build that is number 1 powerful and number 2 unique, that is a pretty big flex within the game. With the removal of sunsetting, all of the old weapons have now come back, with a select few of them actually being slightly relevant if you're able to have a good roll. Therefore, if you have something like a Kindled Orchid, a Mindbenders, a Duke, or something with a 5 out of 5 roll, this is pretty impressive because most players just dismantled these over the years. Another thing that most people dismantled was the 0 power Red War gear, which looks really unremarkable at first, but nowadays it's a prized collector's item. This gear was literally power level 0 and only obtainable for a certain time after starting the campaign way back in vanilla in 2017. Perhaps the greatest flex from back in Destiny 1 was buying the Galahorn when it first came out, because essentially nobody did this when Xur sold it on the second week of the game. Exotics in 2014 were really rare and really hard to get, and Galahorn was the king of all of them, so if you had this and you were smart enough to buy it during the second week, this was a massive flex back in the day. During the Into the Light event from before Final Shape, there was a brief period where you could get the shiny versions of the Brave Arsenal weapons. These were only available for about 2 months, so if you were able to get a shiny version that also had a perfect roll, this is definitely a flex because these are obviously no longer obtainable nowadays and they just look extra cool. One of the greatest demonstrations of skill in the history of this game is doing a low man or even a solo defeat of a raid boss. These can be some of the most impressive flexes and biggest demonstrators of skill because they require unique challenges and a lot of technical ability in order to complete. These players often spend like 100+ hours just mastering the mechanic and mastering their loadout until they eventually pull it off because there is essentially zero room for error. Destiny has been around for a really long time with millions of people coming and going, so if you're still around and you are one of the day one or the beta players from way back in the day, that is pretty cool. The game even recognizes this in certain situations because if you are a veteran, it will give you different dialogue in certain missions. Almost all of the emotes in the game are acquired through the Eververse store, but the Luxurious Toast is one of the few emblems that you could actually earn. This emote had an RNG chance to drop in the Spire of Stars raid. The raid itself is of course in the DCV, and it was pretty hard to complete back in the day, so if you have this emote now, it is considered to be pretty cool. Right when the 30th anniversary event came up in Destiny 2, there was a new perk called Eager Edge that everybody wanted to get on their swords. It was commonly obtainable on this blue sword, but there was also an extremely rare version of it called the Other Half, and it was on a purple sword. The drop of the sword itself was pretty rare, but if you were lucky enough to get the sword and have the Eager Edge perk and also have a damage perk, this was considered extremely awesome, and it spawned one of the greatest memes in Destiny's history. The Crimson Days and Revelry both had some interesting items from way back in the day of Destiny 2, so if you still have these items, it's pretty cool because the game hasn't had these events in many years. The raid exotics have some of the lowest drop rates for anything in the modern game, and they're also quite desirable, so if you're lucky enough to get a raid exotic on your first ever run through the raid, that is quite a flex. Some players go through the raid like 50 times without ever getting it, so if you get it on your first try, that is pretty enviable. Destiny has been through a lot with many ups and downs over the years, so next up, check out this video covering the entire evolution of Destiny ever since it started development way back in 2007. Thank you for watching and have a nice day.